You'll have heard of the myths and the legends of the TSR-2, the aircraft 50 years ahead of its time. You'll have seen the documentaries and the YouTube videos praising every rivet and bolt on this white cuboid with wings.
Your dad may have also told you that if it wasn't for the Labour government or America's meddling,
that the RAF would have had the greatest aircraft ever. In truth, the TSR-2 and its soap opera of a story is much more complicated than that. Join me, a history nerd named Alex, in looking at one of the most overrated aircraft of all time. This is the TSR-2, or the Tactical Strike and Reconnaissance 2. God, what a fucking boring name. What happened to naming our aircrafts interesting things like a Tempest, a Hurricane?
Gods, what a stupid name.
So why was it made? General Operational Requirement 339, announced in November 1956, was the beginning of the problem. The RAF wanted a replacement for the Canberra, and it wanted the replacement to do everything. Conventional bombing, tactical nuclear strikes, reconnaissance, signals intelligence. They probably even wanted to make you breakfast in the morning. They wanted it to operate at low altitude, supersonic speed, high altitude, long range, and carry a payload heavy enough to rival a small city. They wanted a flying Swiss Army knife on steroids. And that's where the idea of the TSR-2 is formed. Now at first, the RAF were offered the Phantom and the Buccaneer, both perfectly good, proven aircraft. But no, the RAF didn't want anything foreign or Navy-like. They wanted a shiny new homegrown aircraft that would make the world gasp in awe. The TSR-2 was born. A plane that promised the moon and somehow ended up with a budget that could buy one. So let's talk about that budget. The original estimate for the project in 1957 had it around 90 million, with the project being planned to be finished in about 1965. The project was officially given the go-ahead on January 1st, 1959, with it being a joint design effort from Vickers Armstrong and English Electric. And by 1961, the cracks started to show. The first prototype rollout was delayed due to wing manufacturing issues, with costs already being 10 million over budget. And in 1962, the first flight was postponed multiple times, with costs going over 80 million over budget. And when flight tests finally began in 1964, structural vibration and avionics malfunctions caused repeated grounding, with the budget ballooning over 110 million. But I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. Let's talk a bit about the technology and engineering of the TSR-2, because it wasn't just ambitious, it was deliriously over-engineered. The TSR-2 used Bristol Olympus engines, 2 of them in fact, which were capable of supersonic flight at low and high altitudes. These engines were revolutionary, yes, but temperamental is putting it mildly. They were prone to overheating, tricky to maintain, and required engineering tolerances so fine that a human sneeze nearby could cause a catastrophic misalignment. Every time a prototype flew, the engineers had to cross their fingers and pray that the engines wouldn't explode mid-test. The TSR-2 had small, highly swept, clipped delta wings, specifically designed for a combination of high-altitude supersonic flight and low-level, high-speed terrain following. The idea was genius on paper. The chicken wings on the TSR-2 weren't a bad idea. They made it fast, agile, and hard to detect via radar. In practice, manufacturing these wings was a nightmare. Tolerances had to be perfect, materials were cutting edge. Any error meant delay. Each delay in wing production cascaded through the rest of the program. However, in its avionics, the TSR-2 truly shined. On paper. The aircraft was supposed to have the most advanced navigation and bombing system of its era, including terrain-following radar, digital bombing computers, and reconnaissance equipment that would make any intelligence agency grin with envy. The problem was that this technology was very much in its infancy. In fact, during all of its test flights, the most complex electronics were never fitted into the aircraft, because they always had a new quirk, glitch, or just flat-out failures. And some were even being invented as they went along. And there wasn't much point in trying to put these complex technologies on an aircraft that struggled to retract its undercarriage during flight. In fact, it was only on its 10th test flight that the landing gear successfully retracted. In fact, let's talk a bit more about its structure, because this aircraft had to withstand supersonic speeds, low-level flight stresses, and landing safely without folding itself into scrap metal, which might have actually improved the look of the aircraft. It also has titanium and aluminium lithium in the airframe, which was extremely advanced, but extremely difficult to manufacture. And, as the story goes with the TSR-2, came with a lot of its own problems. Remember those structural vibrations I was telling you about earlier? They were always persistent whenever the aircraft tried to land. And during the time of the project, the issue was never addressed. But I mean, who needs to land an aircraft anyway? Now let's talk a bit about the political and financial side, because what's a British aircraft project without a bit of bureaucracy making it 10 times worse? Initial cost estimates were already pretty astronomical, but as the engineering problems mounted, the prices soared. And with constant delays, persistent issues not being ironed out, and no end in sight for the project. It was cancelled after only 24 test flights in 1965. And at the time of the project's cancellation, the total expenditure was estimated to be around 175 to 200 million, which equates to around 3 to 4 billion in today's money. Something that the UK could desperately not afford, dealing with post-war austerity, declining global influence, and a treasury that probably wanted to cry every time someone mentioned the TSR-2. It was the Labour government under Harold Wilson that cancelled the TSR-2 due to budget cuts, because nothing quite encapsulates the arrival of a new Labour government than budget cuts. But I believe this one was warranted, but you'll see Harold Wilson's name cursed out on any forum that talks about the TSR-2. And oh boy, I've heard many people talk to me about him. But for me, the thing that I think most people tend to forget when it comes to the TSR-2 is a small matter of something called mass production. When designing a military vehicle, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. Yes, if you're designing a tank, you won't want the thickest armour on it, the biggest gun. You want it to have the agility and movement of an F1 car, with all the latest technology money can buy you, and even create new technologies that can go into it. I'm sounding a bit like the Germans in World War II now, aren't I? And theoretically, that tank could be the alpha male of all tanks. But what use is that tank when you can only make one of them, because it is obscenely fucking expensive and it takes years to make it. And you have to get the best engineers from across the world to even maintain the fucker. That was essentially the TSR-2's problem. It was too advanced, too complex, too expensive for its own good. This thing would have been highly unsuited for mass production, especially under the Air Force that it was serving. And I mean, good luck with something like this on the export market. There's also a little issue to the TSR-2's intended role as well, that of a tactical nuclear strike aircraft, which was being rendered increasingly irrelevant by Polaris submarines. The aircraft, which was supposed to secure Britain's nuclear deterrent, was about to become redundant. So with the cancellation of the project, the RAF now had a massive hole in its pocket, and all they had to show for it was a couple nice museum pieces. So they looked elsewhere to the F-111, which was briefly considered as a replacement, which is also where the theory of the American meddling and, arm twisting comes in. But anyways, Britain decided that that would be too expensive. But for the time being, it still needed an aircraft to fill that tactical strike and reconnaissance role. So remember at the start of the video when I told you about the F-4 Phantom and the Buccaneer being offered to the RAF? Yeah, well, they saw service in that role. And that's right, almost a decade of development, millions spent, and a monumental headache, all to end up exactly where they started. So yeah, the TSR-2 had some things going for it. Supersonic speed at low level, terrain following radar, advanced avionics, and enough engineering brilliance to make modern engineers weep. But brilliance doesn't pay the bills or deliver the payload. Ambition doesn't make deadlines shrink. And revolutionary technology doesn't make an aircraft practical to produce or operate. The TSR-2 is a cautionary tale in excess. Too advanced for its own good, too expensive for the government it served, and ultimately to be relevant in the role that it was going to fill. In short, the TSR-2 is the ultimate what if. What if Britain had unlimited money? What if the engineers had an extra decade? What if the RAF actually wanted to spend millions on something that wasn't necessary? It's a technological masterpiece, an engineering marvel, and a financial disaster rolled into one. An aircraft that could have been incredible in a land of make-believe. But hey, don't tell that to all of its fans, the hundreds of people who've created videos and documentaries glazing this what-if machine.
In fact, what if should be the real name of the TSR-2? That or the TSWOR-2, the totally shit waste of resources too. The number one, of course, being the...
I hope you enjoyed this hater's guide to the TSR-2. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, share with your friends, and let me know what you thought in the comments, as I'm sure many of you have already done. And let me know what hater's guide you'd like to see next.